All right, so give me a moment here to get our screen share up and running. And then if you want to leave the big lights on, if you want to leave just the little lights on, you want to turn them off, whatever is going to work for you.
How's that? Is that okay?
I think that's good. Any darker than that, and I'm going to have trouble staying awake. All right, bear with me just a moment here. And let's get that out of the way. All right, here we go. There we are. So one of the, many of you probably saw the videos that I posted while I was down there, and I realized while I was down there, one of the themes that emerged pretty quickly was this idea of come and see. Almost everybody we talked to was glad that we were there just so we could actually lay eyes on the situation. And so that is kind of the theme that carries throughout my reflections on this. So when we arrived in San Antonio, we stayed at the Emily Morgan Hotel. One of the reasons this is significant is if you look at the picture on the right, you will see this stone structure here. That is one of the walls of the Alamo. So it is right downtown. It is right across the street from the Alamo. From my hotel room, I could look down right into the courtyard of the Alamo. And in 2015, no less of an authority than USA Today named it the third most haunted hotel in the world. That's kind of interesting. Why would this particular hotel be so haunted? I saw no apparitions or anything. I had no odd occurrences. I just want to throw that out there. Why would this place be haunted? Well, that depends on who you ask. The building was originally built as a hospital, and in the basement was the morgue. So people have said the basement is kind of haunted. Forgot which floor they said was extra haunted, but so is it haunted because it's a hospital and not everybody who goes to the hospital gets better? I don't know. It's also right across the street from a battlefield where a bunch of people were buried in a mass grave when it was over. So what story are we going to tell about this place? Are we going to tell the story of a place of healing where unfortunately not everybody makes it? Or are we going to tell the story of a place that was kind of witness to a massacre? That was one of the themes that came up, is that which stories we choose to tell make a difference. And so by getting down there and listening to a lot of different people's stories, we were able to get a fuller picture of what is going on around the border. So why is it called the Emily Morgan Hotel? So Emily West was born a free woman of color and became an indentured servant to a man whose last name was Morgan. So her last name got changed to Morgan. She became a part of the story of Texas independence because she was captured by the Mexican army. And during the Battle of San Jacinto, which was after the Battle of the Alamo, General Santa Anna was otherwise disposed with Emily Morgan while the battle was going on and could not direct his troops. The Mexican army was routed and Texas independence pretty much flowed from there. So again, which story are we going to tell about the woman who gave her name to this hotel? Is she a war hero? Is she a woman who is the victim of human trafficking? She is also traditionally said to be the inspiration for the song "The Yellow Rose of Texas." So her place in Texas history runs deep, and yet there are these competing stories about who she was and what she did. So we did have the opportunity to visit San Antonio Riverwalk that was nearby to our hotel, and the Riverwalk is nice. It cuts right through downtown, and we did happen to find a few of us happened to find a tiki bar along the Riverwalk, and if you think kitschy tiki bar, it was this place. It was a lot of fun. So after that, the next day, we got up, we walked across the street to the Alamo. So on the left, you can see the cenotaph. This is the monument that Texas built to the people who died at the Alamo. And on the right, you can see me standing in front of the church. I think when most of us think of the Alamo, this is what we think of. The church is actually only one part of this whole compound. And I'll show you a little more about what some of those compounds look like later. But we did a prayer walk around the Alamo. Actually, we did two walks. We did a history walk where there were several stops along the way where our hosts in San Antonio gave us a list of questions to discuss. And then we walked around again with the list of scriptural citations for each of those places and an opportunity to pray. Part of what that walk uncovered is that this particular spot on the map has, for a long time and continuing to today, been a contested space. It was the site of a battle. It is currently the site of some very touristy development. And of course, some people in the city think it's great. Some people think it's awful. And other people are saying, why are we putting resources into this when people are homeless in our streets? So again, we have that idea of a contested space, and this is the favorite spot of people in San Antonio to protest. Whatever the cause is, the Alamo is where they do that, both because it will get attention, because it's a touristy spot, and also because the Alamo itself is just a place of protest. It's a place that is contested space. So we made our way inside the church, and underneath where these flags are was where the altar of the church used to be. Now there is a scale model of the Alamo that kind of depicts the battle, and around that are some bronze plaques that have the names of the people who died in the battle. But this idea of contested space, you can see right in this picture. So over the course of, at least when European people have been recording the history, of course, there were people living here before anyone from Europe got here, but people that have laid claim to it. We have Spain, we have France, we have Mexico, we have the Republic of Texas, we have the United States, we have the Confederacy, and we have the United States again. So, again, it's kind of crazy. This spot, the border has moved around this spot many times. Interestingly enough, in the early part of the 19th century, Texas, as most people know, was part of Mexico. And Mexico invited a bunch of Anglo settlers to move from the United States to this part of Mexico to settle it. In 1829, Mexico abolished slavery. The Anglo settlers who had come from the United States had brought slaves with them, and they were not about to give up on slavery. So they said, we are going to secede from Mexico. By 1836, Mexico sends the army up there and they say, no, we are not going to let you just leave the country. And that is how San Antonio and the Alamo came to be a battle site. It is that conflict that brought people to fight here at the Alamo. So again, is the Alamo the story of a heroic last stand? Is the Alamo the story of people fighting to preserve slavery? Which story we tell makes a difference. One of the things we touched on was part of telling the story is, can we honor the people who are in the story? Can we tell the story in a way that the people would recognize themselves in it? And sometimes we do a good job of that, and sometimes we don't. So the Alamo, I found really fascinating. Let me stop there and ask for questions. And you may have to unmute yourself to ask questions. Beautiful. So after the Alamo, we loaded up into our two big vans, and we drove south from San Antonio, which hopefully you can see up here. Mark and I cannot see it because there's a toolbar up there, but we drove south from San Antonio, 3.5, 4 hours to McAllen. And I have kind of drawn a black line here, approximately where the border is, because it's hard to see on the map. So here's McAllen, right on the border. That is where we spent most of our time when we were down there. Our first night in McAllen, we had dinner with Pastor Robert, and Pastor Robert is the campus pastor for the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And at that dinner, we had some just kind of general thoughts and considerations about borders. One of the things the presence of a border does is it kind of forces at least some definition of identity. You know, who can cross this border, who can't? How easily can people cross this border or not? There are people in McAllen who consider it the most secure part of the United States. There are more law enforcement personnel per capita than anywhere else in the country. And yet we are going to find out that there are other people who do not feel that way at all. What Pastor Roberts said was, kind of given the presence of a lot of law enforcement, given that there are checkpoints further north, so there's kind of this zone in between the border and the checkpoints where there's kind of a different level of control, so to speak. He said, we feel like we're detached from the rest of the United States. And that struck a little bit of a chord with me, because sometimes I feel that way in Northwest Indiana. We're too close to Chicago for the rest of Indiana to claim us. And yet in Chicago, we're part of Indiana, so they don't want us either. So I have a colleague who refers to us as the stepchild region. But so I thought that was interesting. He also mentioned we are not the first group of pastors from this Wabash program to visit McAllen, Texas. And he said in previous trips, the Border Patrol was very hesitant to want to talk to a group of pastors. He said he called them this time, and they were really excited. He's just said that was unusual compared to what he's seen in the past, and just an interesting change. And he also mentioned that illegal immigration here goes way, way back. This is not a new issue. And a time when there was a lot of illegal immigration was actually the 1850s and 1860s, because this was a stop on the Underground Railroad. People were illegally leaving the United States to escape slavery and entering Mexico. So I thought that was really interesting, that idea of kind of the tables being turned. And it wasn't that it was illegal for the people to go into Mexico. It was illegal for them to leave the United States. So one of the things they told us before we left for the trip, and I just want you to be aware of this before we start, our director, who's sitting here, said, do not think you're going to walk away with any simple, easy answers. Our goal is to complexify everything for you. And oh my, did they succeed in that. So the next day, we got up bright and early, and we went downtown to Catholic Charities, Rio Grande Valley, the Humanitarian Respite Center. And we met with Sister Norma Pimentel, and the first thing she told us was, I'm glad you're here. I want people to come and see what's going on. She said a bus arrives every hour, and sure enough, as we were standing outside, a bus pulled up and about 50 people got off. They walked across this sidewalk here into not this building that we're standing in front of as we lay hands on and pray. That's this. So they walked across the street to get tested for COVID and possibly other things, but certainly for COVID. So yeah, she said it's like living in the movie Groundhog Day. Every day, bus comes every hour. She said what drew her into this ministry was she had the idea, I need to come and see. She came downtown and there were people who had just kind of been dropped off and left downtown. And she said, these people look like they're in rough shape and, you know, they're kind of easy prey for any kind of criminal activity. Maybe I can at least get them off the street while we figure out what to do. And so in coordination with the Catholic Church in town, she started kind of having meals for people in the church, and then they moved down the street to this facility here. And the mayor showed up and asked her what she was doing here, and she said, I'm restoring people's dignity. And she said, that is something that we in the church can and should talk about, that people in a lot of other capacities who are involved in stuff along the border either will not or cannot talk about. And she said, that is something we in the church need to claim and hold on to. So part of what is going on is that there are so many people coming across the border, the US cannot send them back home fast enough. So one of the rules that people have to abide by is that you have 72 hours after someone's apprehended to send the person home, or they need to be paroled. And we can't get the people sent home fast enough, so a lot of people are being paroled. They are being released from custody. So a lot of the people who are living in police station lobbies and tents in Chicago and New York and places like that, a chunk of that is a result of that. We cannot get the people sent back to where they came from fast enough. Another thing that is a new reality that all of the systems around here have not caught up with yet are that there's a big Venezuelan contingent on their way. And, you know, Venezuela has lots of problems and people are really desperate to get out of there. They want to come to the United States. One of the issues is we do not have a big Venezuelan community in the United States. If people are coming from Mexico, or people are coming from even many of the Central American countries, there's a good chance there's someone they know or someone they're related to already here. So they at least have a place to go where somebody can take a little responsibility for them. But most of the Venezuelans do not. So they said that's a new wrinkle in it. In addition to the political unrest you have in Venezuela and the grotesque violence you see in a lot of the Central American countries, there are governments in parts of Latin America that have looked at Mexico and said, hey, there are billions of dollars in remittances going to Mexico. People come from Mexico to the United States and work, and they send money home to family. And all of a sudden, family has money to spend on things. And this is billions of dollars that is being pumped into the economy in Mexico. And other countries in Latin America see that and they say, man, it would be great for us to get a piece of that action. So there is also encouragement on the part of some of the countries to come to the United States. Hey, you know what would be a great idea? go to the United States, work up there, and send some money back here for people to spend. So not only are there, not only are those things that are kind of pushing people out, but then you also have some of the people in Central America kind of creating this pulling towards the United States. Oh, going there to work is just the best. You know, you really should do it. And that kind of blew me away. Sorry, I have to slake my thirst here. So inside the respite center, we got inside and Sister Norma said, this has really been a lesson that our faith isn't limited to what we want. It is about who God is revealing himself to be. And she said, God is revealing himself as the one who wants us to care for the stranger. And I thought that was interesting. Sometimes our faith calls us to do things we would not otherwise come up with on our own. And I thought that was interesting. And she said, you do not have to look far in scripture to see points in scripture that really touch on some of what's going on right here at the respite center. She said, read Matthew's gospel. Mary and Joseph get up and leave their country because they fear for the safety of their child. And she mentioned that another dynamic that is playing out is that among people who show up without documentation, people who show up without legal status, there's tension because there are people who have come here and worked for many years and they have no legal status. There are people who show up at the border, get across, and for whatever reason, and there are reasons, it's not, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Oh, don't look at me.
Not, it's not random. There's a better word for it that I can't think of. It's not random, but there are other people who show up and very quickly get some kind of legal status. So there is tension even among the community of migrants as to how people achieve any kind of status. So behind Sister Norma in here in the respite center, kind of under the TV and under the map, is her communication center. And that is where people come up and talk to her staff people, and the staff people have questionnaires and they really drill down to see if there is anyone at all in the United States they have a connection to. And what she said was, I am not going to send someone away from this respite center until someone will take responsibility for them, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a church, whether it's a nonprofit organization. Her exact words that I wrote down were, I don't want to burden another city. There is a right way to do this. Now, unfortunately, Sister Norma is one person in one town along a border that has thousands and thousands of miles and hundreds of places you can cross. Very clearly, there are a lot of people who are not taking that same kind of action. Thinking about come and see, I came and I saw, and I did not see, one thing I did not see people smiling in this respite center. And I kind of thought maybe people would feel some sense of relief, or, you know, wherever they made this journey from, there's someplace where at least they're safe. They don't know what is going to happen after that, but maybe at least they feel safe. But I did not see a sense of relief on any of these faces. I saw people who were kind of looked like they'd been chewed up and spat out, exhausted, worried, scared. One of the people we spoke to said, I don't think the people we see here in this part of Texas, close to the border, I don't think they see themselves as, you know, Israel in the wilderness. That maybe the biblical image that speaks to them is that servant song from Isaiah 53, the man of sorrows, acquainted with sorrows. And that kind of seemed to be the vibe I got when we were there. So from the respite center, we made our way a little bit further south to the McAllen Hidalgo International Bridge. This is a busy place. People are crossing the border each way every single day. The border is part of a free trade zone. If you have the right documentation, the hardest part about getting across the border is waiting in line. So again, that idea of borders kind of force some sense of identity. Depending on who you are, it's very easy to cross this border, or it's very difficult. So yeah, people cross this border every day to work, to shop, to go to school, to get something to eat. It's kind of like crossing from Illinois into Indiana, only there's a checkpoint. So we walked across the bridge, bienvenido a Mexico, and here we are. What's interesting is we walked along the bridge, we came across under this little awning here, and we went into the immigration hall area, and I had my passport out, and I was looking for, you know, where's there a desk or something or a sign, you know, immigration, nothing. Mexico does not care who comes into the country. A few of my colleagues that had backpacks had to scan them through an x-ray machine, but there were some Mexican immigration people there, and I don't think they even looked at me. So that, in my mind, is another aspect of what's going on. Mexico is our next door neighbor as a country, and in some ways it's a lot like the United States, and in other ways it is vastly different. And at least in this way, in the United States, we really put a high priority on knowing who is coming into the country. In Mexico, not so much. So that probably is an aspect of what's going on. Interestingly enough, the first things you see after you come out of the border crossing, it's all stuff that exists for the sake of Americans. We've got a medical lab, and we have a couple of dental offices. We took a left once we crossed the street, and right in this building is a casino and a drugstore. Medical care is cheaper in Mexico. Prescription drugs are cheaper in Mexico, and people can go there and gamble. So the stuff that's there, that's one of the things that's bringing Americans across the border. People from Mexico cross into the US to work, to go to school, to shop. There's stuff that either they can't get in Mexico or it's cheaper in the United States. So people are back and forth across the border all the time. So we crossed the street, we hung a left, we walked maybe about 2 blocks to this park. Until spring of 2022, there were about 3,000 people living in this park. This was a place where people would hang out until they either were able to cross into the United States or until they decided it was time to attempt to cross into the United States. The US government has an app, and you can get this app on your phone, and that is what you use to schedule an appointment with an immigration officer. So if you have the app and you have your appointment, this is the kind of place where you hang out and wait until your number comes up or until your appointment comes up. You show the people at the border crossing, I have an appointment with an officer, and they send you in the right direction. Other people kind of wait until there is a big group of people, and likely they talk to some cartel or organized crime people, and they tell them, we're going to head to the river tonight, and we're going to send a bunch of people across, because if we send 400 of you across at once, some of you are going to get caught, but most of you are going to make it. So as you can see, this is not a place that is set up to house anybody, much less 3,000 people. You will note no running water, no sanitation, no electricity, and this camp existed prior to 2020, and then in 2020, when lots of people were getting very sick, you had 3,000 people living on top of each other who could not even wash their hands. So this is bad news for everyone involved. There are some of the people who study migration who believe that up to 40% of the people who leave South and Central America and try to get to the United States die along the way. People who are passing through Mexico are able to get a 6-month permission to stay in the country. People are allowed to work. So if they're hanging out here waiting for an appointment to talk to US immigration, they can work, but there is a lot of red tape they have to work their way through in Mexico. Something that came up that I thought was really interesting. So again, we have the Venezuelans. That's a new aspect that we're still trying to figure out how to work with. But also, previously, many, if not most of the people coming to the United States were coming for economic opportunities. People wanted to come to the US to work and make better money here than they could make at home. Many of those people would come to the United States for a while, work, save up money, and then go home. I know this is definitely true in my family. My grandfather was born on a farm purchased with money my great-grandfather made from making 2 trips to the US and going home. So one of the things that's different is many of the people coming from Venezuela and Central America, they are less concerned initially with finding work and more concerned with, I want to get somewhere where my life is not on the line simply by walking out my front door. So previously you had a lot of people who, maybe were thinking about going home. These are folks who, they are never going home. They will not return of their own volition. So that too is a new wrinkle that is challenging to navigate. So our immigration system is being faced with circumstances it was not designed to work with, so to speak. When we were done in Mexico, we walked back across the river on the bridge, and this is what it looks like from the south going to the north. So people who are coming into the United States, kind of looks a lot like a toll plaza. And again, there's even a like a preferred lane if you have the right documentation. I don't know if you buy a pass, but there's an express lane for getting across. So for some of the talk of, oh, the border is really heavily militarized and this and that. I mean, being a Midwesterner, it looked to me a lot like a toll booth. So again, the expectation and the reality were a little bit different. Let me stop here for just a moment. Questions, comments, concerns, insights?
That statistic you gave of 40% of people coming from Central America that died, that seems hard to believe, because that, given the numbers of people, I mean, you'd be talking about over 500,000 people would be dead. easily.
The number sounds pretty steep. Part of what makes me think the number could be kind of high is that people leave home, and as far as the people who are still at home can tell, they've just kind of disappeared. So nobody's looking for these people. So I don't know if 40% is really 100% accurate. That's what someone mentioned to us when we were close to the border. But I am sure the number is high. People are walking thousands of miles. There's a lot of parts of Central America and Mexico that are very dangerous. They don't have any medical care. Finding food and water is probably more difficult in some places. So I'm sure there's a good amount of attrition. Like I said, this is what I was told. I was told 40%. And Tom, yeah, I would agree. It seems like a lot, but maybe it's close to being on the ball.
I could see 40% unaccounted for.
Right.
So
Maybe.
like you said, they just disappeared, never heard from again. Doesn't mean that they're not,
Right.
you know, that they've passed, but
If
if they get here and they stay here,
I was
and they
gonna say,
I'm never looking back.
if they've gotten into the United States, they probably are trying to keep a low profile.
That
So-
could be too, yeah.
So I even remember my grandmother telling me that on the boat on the way from the old country, there were people who did not make it. So again, this is some of the circumstances are different. Some are just kind of the movement of peoples, no matter where they're coming from or when. That evening, we did join Pastor Robert, who you can see over here at the University of Texas, Rio Grande campus ministry, and the student band led us in worship. And then after that, we had tacos and they had a mariachi. So that was a nice evening. I mentioned to some folks, is the only time I have ever gone and seen and heard a mariachi and there was not beer, because it's a college event. And so it was just, like I said, it was a new experience. But most of these students are either people who were born in another country and came here as little tiny children, or their parents came over and they were born here. So it's a lot of first and second generation immigrants from Latin America, and that very heavily shapes the culture. I mean, just from this picture, you can see there are not a lot of people here who look like me. So this is really part of the culture in the area. So the next day, we got up nice and early and we headed down to the river. So here I am standing in the United States, and behind me you can see the water, and on the other side of the water is Mexico. So we are right here along the Rio Grande, and that is where we met Mr. Brand. If you were to think stereotype of Texan, that probably gives you a pretty good idea of Mr. Brand. He's a lifelong resident of the McAllen area, and he is director of the local water district and owns a business in the area. And one of the things he said was, I'm really glad you pastors from the Midwest are here. I want people to come and see what's happening in my community. So again, someone who holds some very distinct views compared to Sister Norma, for example, both of them saying the exact same thing. People have to know what's going on here. People have to come and see. One of the things he talked about was, so we're standing right there, the river, as I'm taking the picture, the river's right behind me. And he said, growing up, the river was a place of recreation. It was a place that was peaceful. It was just a great place to go as a kid and fish or swim, whatever you want. And he said, all of that is gone now because of threats and violence and intimidation from organized crime on the other side of the river. He said, I feel like a way of life that I grew up with is gone. He said, people, it's great land for ranching. There's a lot of farming going on. He said, people are afraid to live on their ranches and on their farms because they have no idea who's going to show up in the middle of the night. Maybe just walking through the farm or the ranch, maybe stopping because they need something along the way. I really felt like there was underneath the fear and the concern, I think there was a lot of grief. There is grief for the loss of what he knew. There was grief for the loss of kind of what he understood as what his community was like. And I think that, I don't know that he would have used that word, but that was definitely something that stuck with me. One of the things that he talked about was, he said that the cartels, of course, got to be big and powerful and wealthy through smuggling drugs. And then they figured out that human trafficking is actually a much better business model. Because to get money from selling drugs, you have to secretly move the product into the United States and sell it, and then get the money back down south. When people are paying you to get them across the river, all the money stays on one side. You don't have to worry about trying to get the money back across. The people pay you, and then you smuggle them across, and then they're on their own. So, again, he talked about, that's one of the things that's kind of been a change lately, is the involvement of organized crime in the movement of people across the border. One of the things he said was, we have the resources to secure the border, but we don't have the will. And I thought that was really interesting for a couple of different reasons. And I'm trying to, and that kind of jives with some things some other people had said, and I'll come back to that in a moment. He talked a lot about the amount of violence going on across the border. And he also told us that people were firing rockets at Border Patrol helicopters and that sort of thing. We were not able to find any reports of that. I feel like American helicopters being shot at or shot down in the US we would have heard about that. But there was a lot of discussion of the amount of violence going on right in the area. Mr. Brand was very adamant about that. So the water district, of course, they distribute water for drinking, for agriculture, and so on. He said that the facility did not always look like this. He said they had to build this fence because they were getting bodies in the river that were getting into the water plant. And he said, again, the amount of violence is shocking. Now, in terms of solutions, Mr. Brand was not real into specifics, but one of the things he mentioned was that there was a presidential administration that wanted to start creating some safe zones in some of these Central American countries where people could come and there would be US consular officials and they could start the process. They could get paperwork going and kind of make the people wait at home. And then once paperwork was processed or whatever, they come to the border or they hop on a plane or whatever, and they already have something they show the immigration and customs guy, and the immigration and customs people say, yes, you have the proper documents, you have a right to be here, welcome to the United States. That program didn't really get off the ground, and as often happens, the next administration said, no, we're not going to do that. So, and again, it was kind of an idea of differing views of what is the solution. One administration was saying, you know, maybe part of the solution is let's try and deal with some of the problem like at its origins, and maybe that'll take some of the pressure off at the border. The other view was no, the way to deal with the problem isn't to, you know, like change the flow of people. It is to do whatever we can to stop the flow. And again, something I'll touch on in a few minutes, but just interesting that the way it goes back and forth. So if folks will permit me about a 30-second break here, I'm going to go refill my water cup because I've been talking a lot and I'm thirsty. Mark, you're in charge.
Touch nothing.
Excuse me. Okay. So after our visit by the river there, we went to a church in McAllen where the Border Patrol sent 3 agents to come and talk with us. And the first thing one of the Border Patrol agents said was, I'm glad you came and saw. I'm glad you came to see us and to talk to us. One of the things that the Border Patrol talked about was their work is not limited to apprehending people crossing the border, but part of what they do is track down the people who are US citizens who are here in the US who have partnered with the human traffickers. They have to get the people across and hide them somewhere until they can find a way to get them past the checkpoints or whatever. And so they said, in addition to being out in the sticks, kind of looking for people as they come across, said, you know, we do a lot of our work in town, finding these houses and finding these people. And he said, not only are they breaking laws, but he said, you know, they're really subjecting people to barbaric treatment. And he said, you know, for no reason other than that, I want to nail these people. The Border Patrol talked a lot about the role of the cartels in having things cross the border. And what he said was, nothing crosses that border without cartel say so. And usually what gets them to say, yes, you can bring this across the border is money. So whether it's drugs, whether it's weapons, whether it's people, the cartel profits off of it. And the Border Patrol talked about something many people touched on. There is a need for systemic change. There are several different agencies that have roles in what goes on at the border. Some of them are more directly in law enforcement. Others are, you know, the State Department, people who do the kind of work of, you know, how do we determine which people get what status? Sometimes the agencies communicate well, other times they don't. So there's kind of a need for systemic change, keeping in mind that, you know, as we've touched on, circumstances are different now than they have been in the past. They said what happens when after they apprehend people, it's kind of a complex process, and it's going to depend on the people's country of origin and what their pathway is. Are they asylum seekers? That's going to lead down one path? Are they people looking for work? That's going to lead down another path. Some of them they catch, and they can tell pretty quickly these people are neither of those. These are actual violent cartel people. Their path is going to be different. So he said there's a lot of complexity even in something seemingly as simple as we've caught a person, now what do we do with them? He said typically Border Patrol is able to provide some basic medical attention, food. They do have shoes and clean clothes. One of the other pastors said, is the border secure? And the agent said, I'm not in the field, and it's not fair for me to answer on behalf of our field agents and say yes or no. He said, I can tell you we are not stopping the flow of traffic, but we are able to keep up with processing the people on our end. Once we have people in custody, we can get them kind of sorted out and moved to where we need them to go. And he closed by saying, we would welcome you to tell your congregations, come down here and talk to us, come down here and see for yourselves. And so at the end, we laid hands on and prayed for our Border Patrol agents. So the next day, we, having heard about the level of violence in that northern part of Mexico and the number of bad actors who might be at work moving people across the river, what did we do? We went on a river cruise. So this is the Rio Grande. And we got on the river, and I was really surprised at how normal and peaceful things were. It's a lot of homes, maybe some vacation homes. People were fishing. There were ranches. There was a lot of just regular everyday life going on along the river. Again, the expectation, the reality, people were telling the stories of this being a place of tremendous danger. And I do not doubt that that is the case. But we're also leaving out the story that it's kind of like a lot of other waterways. Like people love water, and they're building houses there. Now, what we did see was a lot of this. These are inflatable rafts, and apparently they are a single-use item. People fill the rafts with people or drugs or whatever, get them across the river, and just abandon them. So we did see a lot of that. So in addition to the normal everyday life stuff, we also saw very clear evidence of a lot of the bad things people were telling us about. We did see a 3-mile stretch of this wall, and interestingly enough, this is a privately funded wall. People fundraised to build this right on the riverbank. The government-built wall, you can't see it from here, it's a couple hundred yards back from the river. And what we were told was that when people were saying, you know what, we're going to kind of put some fences and walls up along the border, there were already levees built as flood control. And some very efficient person said, we've already got 10 or 12 feet of barrier here. We could just put, 10 feet of fence on top of it, and we got a 20-foot barrier. So my thought was, you go down there and there's, right at the border, there's wall. No, it's several hundred yards in from the river. So like when we went to the water district, they had to open a big gate in the wall for us to get through there. So there's even space between the wall and the river. And I just thought that was interesting. So I did not show any pictures from the flea market. Some of the ladies in our group heard from some of the students at the student ministry that the one flea market was really great and we should go to the flea market. I got some really awesome tacos there, but I did not buy anything at the flea market. After the flea market, we went to unincorporated Hidalgo County, and we went to the Buckner Family Hope Center. And they said, "We are glad you are here. We want you to tell your people back home in the Midwest, come and see and bring a friend." They are in unincorporated Hidalgo County because the people they work with don't want to go into the city. Folks are kind of out here on their own. There is very minimal services in terms of law enforcement, emergency medical support, that sort of thing. But many of the people are okay with that. They would just as soon have very minimal interaction with any kind of official people. So we went in there and they gave us a presentation on a lot of what they do. And I'll touch on a little bit of that in a moment. But from there, we got back in the vans and we drove out to what they call a colonia. And it's an unincorporated town. It is not recognized by any county or local government. And this is actually, you know, these are some of the nicer structures we saw. I mean, there are parts of this area that just look really run down and sad. This particular, there are approximately 2,900 colonias along the Texas-Mexico border. People who have just arrived might choose to settle there. They don't want to try to cross the second set of checkpoints to get further into the United States. People might choose to settle there. Some of these things, I was having trouble believing this was the United States. Like, this is something I see on the news from somewhere else. It was really kind of surprising. This particular colonia, it says home to about 9,000 people, and it is about 1 square mile in area. To give you an idea of what that means, 9,000 people per square mile. The city of Chicago's population density is about 4,500 people per square mile. So out here in kind of the middle of nowhere, you've got this super densely populated town. So our group of pastors, one of the families that Buckner has worked with, invited us into their home. So the dad was born in the United States, and the mom was born in Mexico, and she came here illegally. And at the moment, so they have 4 children, and their oldest daughter is not in the picture because she is serving in the Navy. And now that she is of age, she is now sponsoring her mother in the citizenship process. So again, just the complexity is interesting. But what Buckner does is kind of similar to, in some respects, to what Cass does in Detroit. Many of you have heard me talk about that on the mission trip. They work on connecting people with financing, and they solicit donations of materials to build safe housing for people. So people are not living in shacks and trailers. And so part of that is similar to Cass, similar to Habitat for Humanity. People need to be selected to get one of the houses. People need to put in a certain amount of sweat equity. People need to take home ownership classes. So they're hoping that they can kind of give people a reason to invest in the community and create some stability there. So I just thought that was fascinating. We had some discussion this morning of what you call a group of pastors, you know, like you have a murder of crows or a gaggle of geese. We call ourselves a cohort, but somebody said synod, and I kind of liked that, a synod of pastors. So after we departed there, we made our way back north towards San Antonio, and on our way south, you know, we just drove right along the road. There was nothing. On the way north, this is the checkpoint. So about 50 miles north of the border, this is exactly what they were talking about when they said we have a series of checkpoints. And we saw there were some cars that were being motioned off to the side for further scrutiny. We pulled up, and our director said, I have a van full of pastors, and they could not get us out of there fast enough. So, but this is the checkpoint. And again, it reminded me a lot of a toll booth. It was not, I didn't feel it was scary or intimidating, or it is not like checkpoints I have seen when traveling in other countries. It was a lot less scary than that. Interestingly enough, so as we kind of reflected in the car ride, people from all different aspects, Sister Norma, Mr. Brand, the people at the Buckner organization, Johnny, who was the captain of our riverboat, all of them said, and this brings me back to what Mr. Brand said about we have the means to secure the border, or we do not have the will. And I thought that was interesting because everyone said in one way or another, there is someone who is benefiting from the border being dysfunctional. Whether that is people in office or seeking office, as long as it's broken, they can kind of project onto it whatever they want. There are other interests, and I do not know what they are, but the fact that so much continues to be dysfunctional when, you know, as Americans, we do have the ability to solve complex stuff. I don't want to, I'll grab the low-hanging fruit here. We put people on the moon. You know, no one else did that. America did that. You know, we have it within us to solve really complex problems. The fact that we have not solved it is fascinating. And I think a piece of that is something I'm going to touch on in a minute. But it was just interesting to hear people who were all over the map on their views on things, all said stuff is just not working. And we think the reason it is just continues to not work is there are people who stand to benefit from it not working. So when we got back to San Antonio, we drove and met up with Pastor John Garland, who is a Mennonite pastor in San Antonio. And I thought the time we spent with him was really valuable in giving us a nice framework for kind of how we reflect on what we saw. And the first thing he said was, we have a lot of questions about what we've seen. Are we as pastors, are we as the church asking Christian questions? Or are we asking the questions that everybody else asks? We talked about the idea of, as we have been there and now we are coming back, can we tell the stories we have seen so that others, you know, kind of I hope I am telling the stories in a way that by me being there, you can have the effect of coming and seeing a little bit. He said, what are you going to bring back with you from the border? And one of the things he suggested was, it's very biblical to say maybe part of what we bring back is an invitation to lament. There are a lot of lives in a lot of different areas that are being turned upside down by things going on around the border. And as people of faith, one of our responses is to lament. And then he asked a question that I thought was just kind of, I'm ashamed I did not think of it myself. I would love to take credit for it, but I won't. He said, what do borders look like in the kingdom of God? He said, you know, are there borders in the kingdom of God? I would have to assume there are. He said, how are those borders set? What do those borders do? And he said, if you look in the Psalms, Psalm 149, Psalm 150, It says, your borders are shalom, your borders are peace. To put it another way, God's will is happening at that border. And that, I think, is one of the things. So we as people of faith will want to ask, is God's will happening at this border? And that leads to another question. And this question, I think, has a lot to do with why it is so hard to find solutions. Why is the border there? There's a lot of historical so we can hear that question in two different ways, at least two different ways. You know, why is the border there? How did the border end up where it is? And there's a lot of historical reasons why it did. I don't see that border moving at any point soon. So maybe the more important way to hear that question is, what is the function of the border? We as Americans depend on things that cross that border. People in Mexico depend on things that cross that border. It's a free trade zone. And yet at the same time, as I said before, we in the United States, we rightfully want to know who is coming into the country. You know, what does and people were talking about a secure border, and one of the conversations we had as pastors was maybe a better way to look at it is, what is a functional border? And a piece of the function, of course, is security. But a piece of the function is, yeah, there are definitely people who should be able to move back and forth across the border. There are goods that need to move back and forth across the border. How do we make that function? Why is the border there? What do we need it to do? And we definitely, I didn't feel like we got a firm answer to that, probably because it's a pretty complex question. So that, I thought, was really something to chew on. What do borders look like in the kingdom of God? So I thought that was a really good way to kind of wrap up a lot of what we did. Just a couple more things here. The next day we had a free day in San Antonio, and I found out that San Antonio is home to a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and I thought, I don't know how many of those I have the chance to see, so I'm gonna go. And so I walked the Mission Trail, and the southernmost of these missions was the Mission Espalda, established in 1690. And the missions are kind of outposts built by the Spanish, and they're big walled compounds. They always have a church, and then they always have, you know, some kind of area for industry, a lot of agriculture. And this is the one that is the furthest south from the city. And these are actually functional churches. These are part of a diocese in Texas. People actually come here to go to church. And you can walk from one mission to the other. It's a lot of walking. But as I was out there, I just kept thinking about John the Baptist. I kept thinking about the voice crying out in the wilderness. And just that notion of out in the wilderness. Here are these churches out in the wilderness. Here is God's people being out here. And that these missions, these were the border at one point. So we talk about, you know, why is the border where it is? Well, before there was a border between the US and Mexico, there was a border between the Spanish part of America and the French part of America. And the French kept moving west, and the Spanish said, no, this is ours. Let's build a little fortress here so that the French people know where they need to stop. So this was the border at one point. And this border kind of ran north-south, south of San Antonio, and it was to keep the French apart from the Spanish. Again, without thinking too much about the people who were living there in the first place. So after quite a big hike, we made it up to Mission San Juan, established in 1716. And you can see kind of, the big stone walls here and buildings where people were working and living. Nice whitewashed church. And as we get further north, the churches get bigger and a little more ornate. And another long walk, we got to the Mission San Jose, established in 1720. And this really does look like a fortress. This is the church. And again, like I said, they get bigger and more ornate. But these are big, thick stone walls, and they had rooms for people living in the walls. And on the other side were, little tiny holes that you could stick a musket out of, but you couldn't really shoot back in. And then I got to here, and then the map said it would be like another 2-hour walk to the last mission. And I said, I think I'm calling Uber. And of course, the last mission on the mission trail was the Mission San Antonio, which the Spanish nicknamed El Alamo, because that's the word for a poplar tree. So, we kind of come full circle and arrive back here at the Alamo. And what I was kind of left with was this thought about the church being out on the border. The church was kind of out there right at the edge of what they knew. The church was right out there at the edge between, one country and another. But in what ways do we as the church live out our mission when we put ourselves on a border? And it's not just, border between one country or another, but all kinds of borders, all kinds of kind of lines that we as people have drawn. What does it mean for us when we situate ourselves on a border? And that's just something that struck me. So yes, as you can tell, it was a very busy week. That is what I have for you with the presentation. Let me stop my screen share there. And hopefully it will cooperate with us here. We got a couple minutes. Questions, observations. I can tell you right now, I do not have any definitive answers on what we do to make our border more functional. I have some very vague thoughts, but they are not really much more than that.
I have one comment to make. It's the pictures of the border and the crossing and the river and everything. I went on business 2 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer. I went to El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
Completely different view. Completely different view. The river there is, you could walk across. If it was ankle deep, it looked like. I asked the customer, the guy I was with, I'm driving along, and I said, what river is that? They goes, that's the Rio Grande. And I said, no, it was smaller than the little Calumet River.
Yep.
And on the other side of it was like Mexican slums. So on one side that we're driving on, it was, El Paso, it was a city.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of that river, I said, no wonder people want to get out of there. I said, if you were walking on those streets there and looked across, 300 yards away, you'd do anything you could to get across there.
Juarez is not the nicest place in the world, that's for sure.
Man.
But yeah, that is a very good point. Obviously the border reaches all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. And circumstances change in different places.
How how impactful would you say this trip was for you, like with respect to some of your other experiences? I know you've been to the Holy Land and that sort of thing. So, I mean, does it compare in terms of the impact it made on your psyche or anything like that, or not so much?
I think I'm still kind of picking up the pieces. I'm still trying to kind of pull from it what I need to take from it. But like I said, I think part of it is that notion of, and I think this would apply to all kinds of things, are we as the church asking kingdom questions? That was something that really stuck with me. But also just that idea of kind of being immersed in it. And I think what we see reported is kind of like this, whereas the actual situation is more like that. Just kind of appreciating the complexity of it, which also kind of makes me leery of anybody who will come in and say, oh, well, I mean, there's a simple way to fix it. And regardless of what that is, if they say there's a simple way to fix it, I'm going to be suspicious. But like I said, I think I'm still trying to kind of pick up the pieces. But yeah, it's definitely fascinating. It was definitely eye-opening. I don't know if it's going to make as good of preaching material as the trip to the Holy Land was. Because I mean, when you're a pastor and you take a trip to the Middle East, you have like a lifetime supply of preaching material from that. But yeah, it's all still marinating up here.
But you were glad you went.
I am glad I had the opportunity to go. Absolutely.
Was there anything or at any time were you able to go to the border at nighttime or at dusk to see
No.
how it is?
No, we did not approach the border when it was dark out. And like I said, we did see when we were on the river, we definitely saw the abandoned rafts. We saw that sort of thing. So we could see some evidence of stuff that was going on when we weren't there, but we did not go at night. I'd contacted a family member in Mexico and said, what do you think about Reynosa, which is the town on the other side of the border from McAllen? And he said, it's that state in Mexico is pretty hairy. And he said, if you go in the middle of the day and you are very observant of what's going on around you, you'll probably be okay. He said, I would not go at night. And we did not. Other thoughts, questions, comments, insights, concerns?
I thought your presentation was very thorough and with neat pictures, because I'm a very visual person. So thank you for putting this all together. I'm sure it really was a very heady and heart thinking and mind thinking trip. And so I appreciate, what you've done to present it to us from your experience.
And I am, like I said, glad to have had the opportunity to make the trip and glad to have the opportunity to kind of share some of my observations with you. So thank you for being here. If there aren't any other questions or things people want to throw out there, can we close our time praying the Lord's Prayer together? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. Blessings on your evening. And we will not be meeting at this time next week, the day before Thanksgiving. We will be back on, I believe it's November 29th, and we will pick up where we left off with the book of Deuteronomy.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good night,
very much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy your DQ.
Good night.